What if I told you the 2008 financial crisis wasn't a crisis at all? What if it was the single most profitable trade in Wall Street history, and you were on the losing side? While you watched your home value collapse, your retirement account evaporate, and your neighbors lose everything. A select group of financial institutions made billions betting against you. Not just betting against the housing market, betting against the very mortgages they sold you. They packaged your debt, insured it, bet it would fail, then engineered that failure. And when everything collapsed exactly as planned, the government handed them a $10 trillion parachute funded by your taxes. You're still paying for it. Every time you see inflation eating your paycheck. Every time you wonder why housing is unaffordable. Every time you hear the phrase too big to fail. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented financial engineering. And the mechanism they used? It's still legal, still active. And the bets are bigger now. Before we expose the exact playbook, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And if you're ready for the unfiltered truth about how modern finance actually works, hit subscribe. Because what you're about to learn isn't taught in economics class. It's barely whispered on trading floors. Let's talk about the greatest heist in history, the one hiding in plain sight. To understand 2008, you need to go back to 1999. That's when everything changed. The Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that separated commercial banks from investment banks, the law that said you can't gamble with depositor money, was repealed. Torn down after 66 years of keeping the financial system stable. The justification? Innovation, competition, modernization. Within months, Citigroup merged with Travelers Insurance, creating the largest financial conglomerate in history. Commercial banking, investment banking, insurance, all under one roof. Your checking account, your mortgage, and high-stakes derivative trading, all managed by the same institution. Sound familiar? It should, because today, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo control your deposits, issue your credit cards, underwrite corporate bonds, and hold trillions in derivative exposure. The same roof, the same risk. But here's where it gets darker. Between 2000 and 2007, the financial sector didn't just grow, it metastasized. The total notional value of over-the-counter derivatives exploded from $40 trillion to $600 trillion. 600 trillion. To put that in perspective, the entire global economy was only $50 trillion. This wasn't finance serving the economy. This was finance cannibalizing it. And the product at the center of this explosion? Credit default swaps, or CDS for short. Here's the official story. A CDS is insurance. If a bond or mortgage defaults, the insurance pays out. Simple risk management, prudent, responsible. Here's the truth. A CDS is a side bet. You don't need to own the bond to buy the insurance. It's like buying fire insurance on your neighbor's house, then handing out matches. Wall Street didn't just insure mortgages. They created synthetic versions of those mortgages, referenced them in derivative contracts, and sold the same risk hundreds of times over. One subprime mortgage could be referenced in 50 different CDS contracts, 50 different bets, 50 different payouts when it failed. And who was writing these insurance contracts? AIG, a AAA-rated insurance giant with zero reserves to cover the bets. Sound familiar? It should. Because today, the credit default swap market is over $10 trillion and growing. The same institutions, the same lack of transparency, the same systemic risk. But in 2005, something even more sinister emerged. Synthetic CDOs. CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, were bundles of mortgages sliced into tranches and sold to investors. High-risk mortgages at the bottom, low risk at the top. The bottom tranches paid higher returns because they absorbed losses first. But synthetic CDOs didn't contain actual mortgages. They contained credit default swaps, bets on whether other CDOs would fail. Think about that. They weren't even selling you the debt anymore. They were selling you bets on the debt. And then they were betting against those bets. Goldman Sachs, in 2006 and 2007, created at least 25 synthetic CDOs with a combined face value of over $70 billion. They sold these products to pension funds, insurance companies, and foreign banks, marketing them as safe, diversified investments. At the same time, Goldman's own traders were shorting those exact products, betting they would collapse. Internal emails later revealed traders calling their own products junk and shitty deals. Sound familiar? It should. Because in 2024, private credit, the unregulated lending market, hit $1.5 trillion. Same lack of oversight, same opacity, same systemic leverage. The game hasn't changed, the stakes just got higher. By early 2007, the warning signs were everywhere. Subprime delinquencies were rising, housing prices were flattening. Bear Stearns had already shut down 2 hedge funds that had collapsed from mortgage exposure. But publicly, the message was clear. Everything is fine. The fundamentals are strong. There is no housing bubble. Ben Bernanke in March 2007 said, "The impact on the broader economy and financial markets of the problems in the subprime market seems likely to be contained." Hank Paulson, in July 2007, said, "This is far and away the strongest global economy I've seen in my business lifetime." But behind closed doors, something else was happening. In August 2007, 3 months after Paulson declared the economy strong, Goldman Sachs executives held an emergency meeting. The topic? Their mortgage exposure. The conclusion? Go short, aggressively. Goldman didn't just reduce their exposure. They actively bet against the housing market, while still selling mortgage-backed securities to clients. This wasn't hedging. This wasn't risk management. This was front-running the collapse, and they weren't alone. Deutsche Bank, through a trader named Greg Lippmann, was packaging and selling CDOs to European investors, while simultaneously buying billions in credit default swaps, betting those same CDOs would fail. John Paulson, no relation to Hank, ran a hedge fund that worked directly with Goldman Sachs to create synthetic CDOs designed to fail. Goldman selected the mortgages. Paulson shorted them. Investors bought them. Paulson made $15 billion in 2007 alone. But here's the part that gets buried in every documentary. The reason this worked, the reason the entire scheme was possible, wasn't just greed. It was structural. The agencies rating these products, Moody's, S&P, Fitch, were paid by the banks creating them. Conflict of interest wasn't a bug. It was the business model. Between 2004 and 2007, Moody's rated nearly 45,000 mortgage-backed securities as AAA, the same rating as U.S. Treasury bonds, risk-free. By 2009, over 90% of those securities were downgraded to junk. But here's the question nobody asks. Who made the decision to let this happen? Not the traders. Not even the CEOs. There's a name, a meeting, a moment when the entire regulatory framework was deliberately gutted to allow this market to exist. You won't believe the name, but the receipt is wilder than you think. Now let's break down exactly how this machine worked, because understanding the mechanics is the only way to see why it's still running. Step 1. Originate the loan. A mortgage broker convinces you to take out a subprime loan. You have bad credit, no income verification, maybe you're using a stated income loan, nicknamed a liar loan. The broker doesn't care if you can repay. They get a commission the moment you sign. That loan is immediately sold to a bank. The broker walks away. You're now someone else's problem. Step 2. Bundle and securitize. The bank doesn't hold your mortgage. They bundle it with thousands of others, prime, subprime, no doc, adjustable rate, and create a mortgage-backed security, or MBS. This MBS is then sliced into tranches, senior, mezzanine, and equity. The senior tranche gets paid first. Low risk, low return, AAA rated. The equity tranche gets paid last. High risk, high return, unrated. Investors buy these tranches thinking they're diversified, safe, and backed by real estate. But here's the trick. The models used to rate these securities assumed housing prices would never fall nationally. Never. The entire structure was built on that single assumption. By 2006, housing prices were falling in 16 states. Step 3. Create synthetic exposure. Now comes the real predatory finance. Banks like Goldman, Deutsche, and Merrill Lynch create synthetic CDOs. These don't contain actual mortgages. They contain credit default swaps that reference other CDOs. It's a bet on a bet, a derivative of a derivative. And here's the genius of the scam. You can create infinite synthetic exposure. One pool of mortgages can be referenced in 10, 20, 50 synthetic CDOs, each one generating fees, each one generating risk. By 2007, the synthetic CDO market was larger than the actual mortgage market. More money was being bet on mortgages than existed in mortgages. Step 4. Sell and short simultaneously. Goldman Sachs sold the Abacus 2007 AC1 synthetic CDO to investors for $2 billion. At the same time, they allowed hedge fund manager John Paulson to help select the underlying assets, and then bet against those exact assets using credit default swaps. The CDO was designed to fail. Paulson made $1 billion. The investors, German banks, pension funds, lost everything. Goldman made fees on both sides. Fees for creating the CDO, fees for facilitating the short. This wasn't isolated. Goldman created at least 25 of these deals. Deutsche Bank created dozens more. The SEC later fined Goldman $550 million. Goldman's revenue in 2010, $45 billion. The fine was a rounding error. Step 5. Insure the bets with AIG. All these credit default swaps, these bets that mortgages would fail, needed a counterparty, someone to pay out when the collapse happened. Enter AIG Financial Products, a small division of insurance giant AIG that wrote over $440 billion in credit default swaps between 2000 and 2007. $440 billion in insurance, with virtually no reserves. AIG's models assumed a housing downturn was statistically impossible. Their risk models didn't even account for a national decline. When defaults started, AIG didn't have the cash to pay. By September 2008, AIG needed $85 billion in emergency loans just to avoid bankruptcy. Who paid? You did. The Federal Reserve and Treasury pumped over $180 billion into AIG, and that money flowed directly to the banks holding the credit default swaps. Goldman Sachs received $12 billion from the AIG bailout. Deutsche Bank got $12 billion. Merrill Lynch got $6 billion. This wasn't a rescue of the financial system. It was a direct transfer of public money to private profits. Let's break down the machine. Let's look at exactly how this mechanism works, because understanding the mechanics is understanding the trap. First, the euro-dollar multiplier. When a US bank makes a dollar deposit in a London bank, that London bank can then lend those dollars out. The borrower then deposits those dollars in another offshore bank, which lends them out again. Each cycle creates more dollar-denominated credit without the Federal Reserve creating a single new dollar. Estimates put the euro-dollar market at over $57 trillion. That's nearly triple the official US money supply. These are shadow dollars, financial dark matter. Here's a concrete example. A Brazilian mining company needs to buy equipment from Germany. Neither country uses dollars domestically, but the transaction happens in dollars through offshore accounts. The German company gets dollars, deposits them in a European bank, which then lends those dollars to a Chinese manufacturer. The same dollars circle the globe, creating layers of debt and credit, all denominated in a currency that isn't being regulated by anyone. This is why the Federal Reserve's interest rate decisions don't just affect Americans. They affect the entire planet. When the Fed raises rates, it's not just making your mortgage more expensive. It's making dollar-denominated debt more expensive for every single government, corporation, and bank holding those shadow euro dollars. 2022 is the perfect case study. The Fed raised interest rates aggressively to fight inflation. And what happened? The British pension system nearly collapsed because they'd borrowed dollars at low rates. Sri Lanka defaulted on its debt. Pakistan faced a currency crisis. These weren't accidents. They were structural features. When the global reserve currency tightens, the periphery breaks first. Now let's talk about the Treasury auction system. the actual mechanism by which U.S. debt gets issued. Every week, the Treasury holds auctions for new bonds. Primary dealers, a group of 24 approved banks including Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and foreign institutions like Deutsche Bank, are required to bid. They must buy these bonds. Then they turn around and sell them to the secondary market: pension funds, foreign governments, insurance companies. Here's the parasitic brilliance. These primary dealers make money on every transaction. They are middlemen profiting from America's debt, guaranteed customers for every new bond issuance. In 2023 alone, the Treasury auctioned over $23 trillion in securities. The fees, the spreads, the interest, it's a wealth transfer machine operating in plain sight. But who's actually buying all this debt? Let's look at the numbers. As of 2024, foreign governments hold approximately $7.6 trillion in U.S. treasuries. Japan holds $1.1 trillion. China, despite all the headlines about dumping treasuries, still holds $816 billion. The United Kingdom, which is really just a hub for offshore financial centers and tax havens, holds $716 billion. But here's where it gets sinister. The single largest holder of U.S. debt isn't a country. It's the Federal Reserve itself, holding over $4.8 trillion in treasuries purchased through quantitative easing. Think about that circular logic for a second. The government issues debt and the central bank, technically independent but part of the same system, buys that debt with printed money. It's a snake eating its own tail and calling it a balanced meal. And who is the second largest holder? U.S. government accounts, Social Security, Medicare, federal retirement funds. Your future benefits are backed by government IOUs to itself. That's $6.8 trillion of internal debt, promises made from one pocket to another, both pockets belonging to the same entity that's already $34 trillion in the hole. This brings us to the real conspiracy. This system requires perpetual expansion. It's not sustainable in any traditional sense, but sustainability isn't the goal. Control is. Because here's what most people don't understand about sovereign debt denominated in your own currency. You can't involuntarily default. You can always print more dollars to pay dollar-denominated debt. The real cost isn't default, it's inflation. It's the slow erosion of your purchasing power. And who gets hurt by inflation? Not the government. It erodes the real value of its debt. Not the banks. They're first in line for newly printed money. Not the wealthy. They own assets that inflate in nominal value. It's everyone living on wages, on fixed incomes, on savings. The grocery store becomes the tax collector. Gas prices become the wealth transfer. Let me give you the math on this moral hazard. If you're the U.S. government and you owe $34 trillion and inflation runs at 5% per year, you just wiped out $1.7 trillion in real debt value, annually. That's wealth transferred from creditors and citizens to the debtor, the state. It's the oldest trick in the monetary playbook, now operating at an unprecedented scale. But the Eurodollar system adds another layer. Those offshore dollars aren't subject to normal inflation because they exist outside the U.S. economy. A dollar in a Singapore bank account used for trade financing doesn't buy groceries in Kansas, so the inflation is asymmetric. The global demand for dollars keeps the dollar's value higher than pure domestic money printing would suggest. This means Americans experience less inflation than the math would predict, but at the cost of exporting dollar volatility to the rest of the world. This is financial colonialism with better branding. Emerging markets borrow in dollars because they have to. When those loans come due, they need dollars to repay. But dollars are scarce in emerging markets, so they have to export real goods, real resources, real labor to earn those dollars. Meanwhile, the U.S. can issue new dollars at will. The terms of trade are permanently tilted in its favor. The 1997 Asian financial crisis, dollar debt. The 2001 Argentine collapse, dollar debt. The 2018 Turkish currency crisis, dollar debt. The pattern repeats itself. Cheap dollars flood the world during easy money periods. Countries borrow, then the Fed tightens. Dollars become expensive and the peripheral economies collapse. Each crisis strengthens the dollar's dominance because it proves you can't escape the system. Here is the mechanism that seals it. The Bank for International Settlements estimated that there's over $65 trillion in dollar-denominated debt held outside the United States. That's $65 trillion in demand for dollars just to service existing obligations. And the only way to satisfy that demand? The U.S. has to run deficits. It has to issue more debt. It has to maintain the Treasury bond production line. It's a debt trap on a civilizational level. So here we are, 53 years after the Nixon shock, trapped in a system designed to never balance, never stabilize, never end. The $34 trillion is just the official ledger. The real number, including unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Social Security, and the Eurodollar shadow system, is somewhere north of $200 trillion in commitments. And here's what makes it terrifying. The system is faster now. It's digital. It's algorithmic. The next crisis won't take months to unfold like 2008. It'll take days, maybe even hours. High-frequency trading, derivative chains, interconnected global banks. The complexity has increased exponentially, while the fundamental fragility has only deepened. We're living on borrowed time, in an economy built on borrowed money, trusting institutions that learned the wrong lesson from every crisis, that they're too important to fail, so they can take any risk they want. This is the ultimate denial. The belief that we can print prosperity, that debt is just a number, that the music will keep playing forever because it has to. But there's no has to in economics. There's only until the world finds an alternative, until the peripheral economies say enough is enough, until the mathematics of exponential debt meets the reality of finite resources, until faith, the only thing backing fiat currency, finally runs out. So I'll leave you with this question, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Are we wiser now, or are we just walking the same path in better suits? If this opened your eyes, share it. Send it to someone who still believes the official narrative. Hit subscribe, because this channel exists to reveal what the establishment won't discuss. The next video breaks down the specific mechanism they are building right now to replace the dollar and why it might be worse. The system was designed to never end, but everything ends. The only question is whether you see it coming.